Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
This week marks the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. If you are like me, the memory of where you were when you heard the news is seared into your memory. It seems like yesterday, doesn't it? 10 years ago this week, we aired an episode right here on the podcast of the radio transmissions of the 9/11 calls and other radio traffic during the minutes after the plane struck. No commentary, just a mix of the chilling sounds of the transmission. We did not do this for sensationalism, but rather for a reminder of what we all went through and our fortitude to never let something like that happen again. We came together as a nation right after 9/11, a time like we never have in this country. One could argue that we may never be that strong again, but others see us stronger than before. A small part of what allowed us to heal after the attacks were the stories of the canine heroes that helped out after the disaster, and how many of these dogs and the jobs they performed changed how we think about working dogs today. That is the topic of today's episode, the legacy of 9/11 dogs.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by Alaska Dogworks Professional Canine Training Center in Anchorage, Alaska. This is Dogworks Radio, committed to families and their dogs to build lifelong and fulfilling relationships. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert and Michele Forto.
Hello and welcome to Dogworks Radio. This is your host, Michele Forto, and I'm the lead trainer of Alaska Dogworks, where we help humans and their dogs have better relationships. On today's show, we are talking about the legacy of 9/11 dogs, what place they hold in our country's history, and how their work helps shape how we think of working dogs 2 decades later. We have mentioned many times on the podcast our own 9/11 dogs. They did not help in the disaster, but they sure touched the lives of many. You see, they were born on September 11th, 2011, and we named the litter of puppies after some of the dogs that worked during the disaster. We have Tikva, Apollo, Hanson, Bree, Salty, and Sirius. Bree was named after arguably the most famous of the disaster working dogs, Bretagne. And our Bree is a service dog that works with a young man. She is a very special dog. She has even saved this young man's life a couple of times. The others in our 9/11 crew are sled dogs and live with us here in the wilds of Alaska and are part of Team Aneke. They are getting up there in age, but they are a reminder every day of canine heroes from the 9/11 disaster. Back to Bretagne. There is a photo on this podcast show notes over on dogworksradio.com from 2012 that is one of unbearable sweetness. 2 golden retrievers are standing together, one with a gray muzzle, the other a puppy, both wearing vests signifying that they are working dogs. The older dog is Bretagne, one of the heroes of Ground Zero. Nearly 15 years after the event, she was still making headlines. In August 2015, Media carried the story of a happy occasion, her 16th birthday, in which she and her handler, Denise Corliss, members of Texas Task Force 1, were feted in New York City. In 2016, sadder headlines told of her death just shy of the great old age of 17. The puppy in the picture is also Bretagne, named in the honor of the 9/11 sniffing celebrity. She is one small part of the legacy of Bretagne and all the other dogs who helped through those dark days, whether they were searching the ruins or easing unimaginable grief. Young Bretagne, trained to detect blood sugar fluctuations in a diabetic patient, is a graduate of a training school, the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. This training school is the brainchild of Dr. Cynthia M. Otto, a veterinarian who worked at Ground Zero. The dogs of 9/11. Otto says that the work of the dogs in that terrible time made her facility possible. Sniffer dogs had been around for decades, but the public had little understanding of what they could do. There was some sense that they might be able to find a lost Boy Scout in the woods, but nothing of the scope and impact of a national disaster, even though they had a critical role in the Oklahoma City bombing and several natural disasters, says Otto. Media coverage of 9/11 focused on the dogs as the one ray of sunshine in a bleak landscape, she says. Images of these dogs working tirelessly, doing whatever was needed to get the job done, captured hearts and minds all over the world. Photos such as the iconic one of Golden Retriever Riley of FEMA's Pennsylvania Task Force 1 moved people to action. Otto says that many dog owners were inspired to pursue search and rescue certification because of those images. The performance of the dogs on 9/11 also sparked serious study of the effects of this kind of work on canine bodies and minds, Otto says. We were able to conduct our longitudinal study of these dogs as a result of the generous funding of the AKC Canine Health Foundation. Press coverage, she says, also gave some search dog training organizations a much-needed financial boost. So what about those super noses? One of those organizations is the nonprofit National Disaster Search Dog Foundation, a group founded in 1995 by a retired teacher, Wilma Melville. After her first deployment, the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, Melville recognized a need for more dogs specifically trained for this kind of work and founded the NSDF. The organization scours shelters looking for dogs with search and rescue potential and prepares them for jobs with fire departments. The training costs about $10,000. NSDF provides the dogs free of charge. Most people in this country had never heard of disaster search dogs before 9/11, says NSDF Executive Director Deborah Tosh. When the news media started focusing on the dogs at Ground Zero, she says, public knowledge really exploded. Tosh and her SDF-trained Black Labrador Retriever Abby were among the FEMA-certified canine search specialists, part of California Task Force 1 at the World Trade Center. About 300 search teams, she estimated, responded. Only about 100 were prepared for a disaster of monstrous proportions in a major city. Many were wilderness search and rescue dogs, experts at finding people missing in the woods. They could not cope with the enormous mound of twisted metal, glass, and smoldering rubble and the urban noises. Tosh says that some television coverage listed NSDF's phone number. Donations started to pour in. We had this influx of funding right after the World Trade Center, Tosh says. The support and publicity helped make Melville's 20-year dream, the National Training Center, slated to open on September 24th, a reality. It's designed to give canine candidates the opportunity to practice on a variety of simulated disaster sites. Soothing souls. The notion that dogs have the power to ease human emotional suffering is not new. Anyone who's cried in the presence of a canine companion knows that. Smokey, a 4-pound Yorkshire Terrier, is credited with being the first therapy dog, cheering wounded soldiers in hospitals on the islands around New Guinea during World War II. Dog trainer Cindy Ehlers first recognized the power of therapy dogs after the May 21, 1998 Thurston High School shooting in Springfield, Oregon. She accompanied one of the first therapy dogs to work with the Red Cross in a disaster and one of the first to be certified for crisis response. After that experience, Ehlers got a Keeshond puppy she named Tikva and trained her for crisis response work. She also started an organization that is today the Hope Animal Assisted Crisis Response in Eugene, Oregon. On 9/11, Ehlers and Tikva traveled to New York. Dealing with such enormous waves of grief, fear, and confusion goes way beyond what is required of a therapy dog who visits hospitals and nursing homes. Ehlers says she saw some become too stressed to work. Most teams stayed at the family assistance centers helping the relatives of the dead and missing. Red Cross mental health experts saw that workers were not talking to the human therapists and thought maybe they would talk to the dogs. Tikva, because of her crisis relief training, became one of the few dogs who worked at Ground Zero helping the responders. Her preparation for working in this environment, as well as her cute looks, rock-solid temperament, and unusual breed, made her ideal for taking minds off of the horror, if just for a few moments. Ehlers says that was where these four-legged therapists earned the sobriquet that they are now known for. A firefighter called up VMAT, which is Veterinary Medical Assistance Teams, after we left and said, "Where are those comfort dogs? They're the only thing that helps me get through the day." Growing need for therapy dogs. A new era for therapy dogs opened on 9/11, says Ursula Kemp, president of Therapy Dogs International, which she co-founded in the mid-1970s. TDI sent 100 teams to New York, where they worked at the Family Assistance Center on Pier 94 and 50 at the Pentagon. They spent about 4 weeks there. Kemp says that most of the dogs rose to the challenge, but some could not handle it. While this was still going on, I called a meeting at TDI and asked everyone who was involved if they wanted to come. We all realized, really, there was absolutely no dissension. We are not prepared for that as therapy dog handlers. TDI tightened its criteria, requiring additional preparation for the human handlers and special certification for dogs participating in disaster relief. Since then, TDI teams have helped people cope with all kinds of disasters, from Hurricane Katrina to mass shootings to acts of terrorism. Kemp says the way the world views working dogs has come a long way, but improvements are still needed. For example, only service dogs can travel by plane in the cabin with their owners. Kemp is trying to persuade airlines to allow disaster relief comfort dogs to do the same. This one change, she says, would bring many more dogs to places where they are needed. Handlers are reluctant to transport their canine partners in baggage. The future of working dogs. Otto believes that the need for dogs trained for all kinds of serious work is going to soar in the future, and more funding, facilities, and people willing to become handlers are desperately needed. Already, given all that they do, she says, there is a shortage of dogs and funds to support them, as well as the research to keep them healthy and performing optimally. The experts also say that there is no way to predict what the future needs will be and how dogs will contribute to keeping us safe and helping people recover from a horror like the events of 20 years ago. People are realizing all of the different ways we can use these canines, Tosh says. We're only limited by our imagination. You may have heard that President Biden just recently signed into law the PAWS Act, which is going to be a pilot program to help veterans that face the ravages of more than 2 decades of war that was spurred on by the events of 9/11, with training and placement of PTSD service dogs. This is an awesome step in helping our soldiers get the help they need in the way of service dogs. We here at Alaska Dog Works are still thinking of ways that we can give back with our Lead Dog Service Dog program as well. Over the last few years, we have trained several service dogs for veterans working with a local nonprofit veterans group, and they covered all of the cost of the training for the dog. We hope to continue that relationship into the future. Before we go, what do you guys think about the legacy of these 9/11 disaster canine heroes and their legacy over the last 20 years? Did you name your dog after one of these canine heroes? We would love to hear their stories in the comments section on our social media channels. Just search Dogworks Radio. I'm Michele Forto for First Paw Media and Dogworks Radio. See you next time.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From First Paw Media, this is Dogworks Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert and Michele Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media. Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog program and Michele Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.